My name is Shen Yu. I am a licensed international psychologist, and my consultation fee is calculated in US dollars. In the upper class circle of Shanghai, people rarely call me by my real name. They call me the destroyer of romance or a cold-blooded money-counting machine. I never try to comfort people. I do not believe in empathy as a solution, and I never encourage emotional dependence. My method is simple. I use logic to crush illusion. I use reality to destroy fantasy. If someone insists on living inside a story, then I calculate the price of that story and show them the bill. Reality, when measured in numbers, becomes the sharpest weapon. That afternoon, I received a case worth 50 million yuan. The client was Mrs. Gu, the powerful matriarch of Gu Corporation. She sat across from me, her posture still elegant, but her face was a mess, mascara ruined by tears. Yet her eyes were not filled with sadness. They were filled with anger and urgency. She said. Her son had gone insane. He locked a girl inside his private villa, smashed everything, threatened everyone, and caused the company stock to drop 10% in a single day. The board was in chaos, the investors were panicking, and the entire empire she built was shaking because of one man. She did not ask for emotional healing. She did not care about his mental condition. She only cared about results. She told me I could sedate him, break him, or send him to a hospital, as long as he returned to normal and showed up at the next board meeting like a functioning heir. I took the file and skimmed through the information. Name, Gu Jingchuan, age 28, heir of Gu Corporation. Diagnosis, narcissistic delusion, antisocial personality traits, extreme possessiveness. Victim, Ling Xiaobai, age 22, former poor student. Current status, unofficially labeled as a canary in a cage. I closed the file slowly and placed it on the table. Then I smiled, a perfect professional smile, and gave her a simple answer. As long as the payment arrives on time, I guarantee within 1 month your son will become a rational man, someone who respects labor, understands cost, and most importantly, values money. At exactly 3 in the afternoon, I arrived at the private villa located on the peak of Mount Changming. The building stood tall and isolated, surrounded by silence and wealth, the kind of place that was designed to separate its owner from reality. The moment I stepped inside, the illusion shattered. A porcelain vase flew past my ear and crashed into the marble wall behind me. The sound was sharp, violent, and full of uncontrolled emotion. A hoarse voice roared through the hall, telling everyone to get out and threatening to bury them alive if they failed to find the girl. I brushed the dust off my shoulder and walked forward without hesitation. The living room looked like a battlefield. Furniture overturned, glass shattered, decorations destroyed, servants and bodyguards kneeling on the ground, shaking in fear. In the center of the chaos stood Gu Jingchuan. He wore a black shirt with the top buttons open. His eyes were red, filled with anger and obsession. His grip on the golf club was tight, veins visible across his arm. He was seconds away from smashing the large screen television. In the corner of the sofa, Ling Xiaobai was curled into herself, her face pale, her eyes filled with tears, her wrist injured, clearly the result of a failed attempt to escape. She begged him to let her go, her voice trembling and desperate, but he only laughed coldly and declared that her life belonged to him and that she would never escape. The atmosphere in the room was suffocating, filled with violence, obsession, and distorted love. I found a clean spot, stepped forward, calmly took out my iPad, and started typing as if nothing around me mattered. Then I spoke, the voice steady and clear. I commented on the force of his swing and the trajectory as if I was observing a sports performance, not a breakdown. He froze for a moment and turned his attention toward me. His eyes locked onto mine, filled with hostility and confusion. That of the moment the treatment began. For the first time since I stepped into that villa, Gu Jingchuan hesitated. The golf club in his hand stopped midair, his fingers still tight but no longer moving. His breathing was heavy, uneven, like someone trying to hold onto control that was already slipping away. He stared at me, as if trying to decide whether I was insane or dangerous. I did not rush him. I simply turned the iPad screen toward him and spoke in a calm, steady tone. I listed every item he had destroyed: the porcelain vase, the crystal table, the leather sofa. Each number precise, each value clear. Then I showed him the total loss within 5 minutes and let the silence stretch long enough for the number to sink in. 5 million yuan. The number hung in the air, heavier than any threat. His expression changed, not completely, but enough. A crack formed in the confidence of a man who believed he could destroy anything without consequence. He clenched his jaw and asked again who I was and why I was there. His voice was still sharp, but no longer fully in control. I ignored the question and moved to the next line of calculation. I told him his accounts had been frozen, all credit cards disabled, all liquid assets locked under the authority of his mother. The only money he had left was the emergency cash in his safe, and at his current rate of destruction, that money would not last long. Then I pointed at the television beside him and suggested calmly that he could continue smashing it if he wished. I even provided an alternative career path for him, collecting scrap at the foot of the mountain where broken glass and electronics could still be sold for a small return. The suggestion was absurd, but it was not a joke. It was a projection of reality stripped of pride. The room fell silent again, but this time it was different. The fear in the servants remained, but something else had replaced the chaos around him. It was calculation. Gu Jingchuan lowered the golf club slightly. His eyes flickered between me and the objects around him, as if seeing them for the first time. Not as tools for emotional release, but as assets with measurable value. He threw the club to the ground with force, but he did not continue destroying anything. The shift was small, but it was the first step. Instead, he turned toward Lin Xiaobai and grabbed her wrist, pulling her up roughly. His movements were still aggressive, still driven by control, but no longer completely irrational. He ordered her to follow him downstairs. She resisted immediately, her voice weak but desperate, as she struggled against his grip. The fear in her eyes was real, not dramatic, not exaggerated, just raw survival instinct. I watched them for a moment, then picked up a chair and my documents and followed behind them at a steady pace. I did not intervene because this was not the moment to stop the behavior. This was the moment to expose its cost. The basement door opened, revealing a space that looked like a carefully designed cage. The walls were decorated, the lighting soft, the furniture expensive, everything polished and controlled. Yet the atmosphere felt suffocating, as if beauty had been forced into submission. He pushed her onto the bed and locked a gold chain around her wrist. The sound of the lock closing was quiet but absolute. He declared that she belonged there, that she belonged to him, his voice filled with intensity that bordered on desperation. Then he leaned closer, his intention clear, his actions following the same script he had likely imagined many times before. Lin Xiaobai closed her eyes, tears falling silently, her body tense but no longer resisting fully. It was the posture of someone who had run out of options. And that was when I moved. I dragged the chair across the floor, the sound cutting through the heavy silence, and sat down beside them. Then I turned on the flashlight of my phone and directed the light straight at their faces. The harsh brightness broke the atmosphere instantly, removing whatever illusion remained. He snapped at me, demanding I leave, but I remained seated and corrected him calmly. I told him I was the doctor and he was the patient, and that we needed to discuss the real consequences of his actions. Then I opened my file and began the next phase of treatment, not with emotion, not with persuasion, but with law and cost. The fantasy had been interrupted. Now it was time to dismantle it, piece by piece. I placed a file on my lap and spoke in a steady tone without raising my voice. I told him the first issue was illegal detention and that the law defined it clearly, with consequences that could not be negotiated. I did not need to threaten him. The numbers spoke for themselves. Years of imprisonment, loss of reputation, collapse of control. For a man like him, control was everything. He froze again, not out of fear, but out of calculation. He was beginning to listen, not emotionally, but logically, and that was exactly where I needed him. I shifted the focus immediately. I told him that the legal risk was not even the most expensive part. The real cost came after that. The moment he decided to keep her here, he had accepted full responsibility for her survival. Every hour, every day, every detail. I listed them slowly. Food, hygiene, medical care, clothing, and everything in between. My tone remained flat, almost indifferent, but each word carried weight because it translated emotion into obligation. His eyes moved slightly toward the chain around her wrist, then back to me. His mind was starting to process the situation differently, not as possession, but as liability. I continued without pause. I asked if he planned to hire someone to take care of her. If he hired help, there would be witnesses. If there were witnesses, there would be risk. If there was risk, there would be exposure. If he did not hire anyone, then everything would fall on him. Every basic need, every uncomfortable task, every moment of maintenance. I paused just long enough to let that image form in his mind. Then I stepped closer to Lin Xiaobai and observed her condition as if she were part of a clinical report. I described her physical state, her recent escape attempt, the time she had spent outside, the likely exposure to dirt and bacteria. I mentioned her unwashed hair, her weakened condition, and then I reached the detail that mattered most. She had not brushed her teeth for 3 days. The room went completely silent. It was a small detail, almost insignificant in another context, but here it was enough to break the illusion completely. I watched his reaction carefully. His expression shifted, not dramatically, but noticeably. His body stiffened, his breathing changed, and for a brief second, instinct overpowered emotion. He hesitated. That hesitation was the turning point. He leaned closer to her again, but this time his movement slowed. His confidence no longer matched his intention. The distance between them was small, but the atmosphere had changed entirely. I did not stop there. I added one more layer. I mentioned the possibility of disease transmission through close contact. I explained it in simple terms, direct and unfiltered. No dramatization, no exaggeration, just basic biological risk. That was enough. He stopped completely. The desire that had driven him moments ago was replaced by something far more powerful: discomfort. He pulled back slowly, releasing his grip without realizing it. His hand moved instinctively, as if trying to remove something invisible from his skin. Lin Xiaobai covered her mouth immediately, her face flushed with embarrassment, her eyes avoiding both of us. The emotional tension in the room shifted from fear to something else, something human, something awkward. The dramatic atmosphere collapsed entirely. There was no longer any illusion of control, no sense of romantic obsession, no narrative to follow. Only reality remained. He stepped away from the bed, creating distance, not just physically, but mentally. The chain was still there. The situation had not changed, but the meaning behind it had. I closed the file gently and stood up. The first layer of his delusion had been broken, not by force, not by confrontation, but by replacing fantasy with cost and instinct. He was no longer acting purely on emotion. He had started to think, And once thinking begins, the next day the entire villa fell into a strange silence. There was no shouting, no breaking, no dramatic confrontation, only resistance. Quiet, stubborn resistance. Gu Jingtran refused to eat and stayed in his room as if starving himself could force the situation to reverse. At the same time, Lin Xiaobai also refused to eat, downstairs holding on to her last sense of control by rejecting everything given to her. Two people trapped in the same system, using the same method to fight it. Emotionally different, but logically identical. At noon, I pushed a medical cart into his room. The curtains were half closed, the air heavy and still. He lay on the bed, his face pale, lips dry, but his eyes still carried that familiar defiance. When he saw me, he let out a short laugh and asked if I had come to beg him to eat. I did not answer. Instead, I pulled out an IV bag and a thick needle, placing them neatly on the tray. The clear liquid reflected the dim light in the room, creating a calm, almost clinical contrast to his unstable state. Then I spoke calmly and explained that, if a patient lost control of their basic survival functions, intervention was necessary. Not optional, not emotional, but required. I listed the cost of the solution. The glucose, the vitamins, the service fee, everything had a price. Everything would be recorded. Then I opened my notebook and wrote one line. One Rolex watch. He sat up instantly, his reaction faster than any emotional trigger from the day before. His eyes locked onto the note, then onto me. Disbelief mixed with anger, rising at the same time. I explained, without changing my tone, that since his accounts were frozen and he had no accessible funds, all treatment would be converted into asset exchange. Each procedure, each intervention, each moment of care would be paid for, one way or another. I moved closer and prepared the needle, my movement steady, controlled, and precise. I told him that if he chose to continue starving himself, I would continue the treatment daily, and each day another item would be removed from his collection. The room fell silent again, but this time the tension was different. It was no longer emotional pressure, it was economic pressure, direct, measurable, unavoidable. He stared at the needle, then at the notebook, then at his own hands. The calculation was immediate and instinctive. Loss was no longer abstract. It was specific, personal, and irreversible. Within seconds, he broke. He shouted toward the door, ordering food to be brought immediately. His voice sharp, urgent, no longer driven by pride, but by preservation. I closed the notebook and stepped back. The treatment had worked. Without wasting time, I moved downstairs. Lin Xiaobai was sitting in the corner, her body weak, her face pale, but her expression still stubborn. When she saw me, she spoke quietly, saying she would rather starve than accept anything from him. I did not bring food. I brought numbers. I handed her a stack of documents and began explaining each one, slowly, clearly, without emotion. The hospital bill for her mother, the monthly cost, the treatment fees, the timeline of what would happen if payment stopped. Her fingers trembled as she held the papers, but she did not interrupt. Then I continued with her brother, his education, his tuition, his future, all dependent on the same source of money. Each sentence removed another layer of emotional resistance and replaced it with responsibility. I explained what would happen if she died here, how the situation would be interpreted legally, how easily the narrative could shift, how quickly her existence could be erased and her family left without support. By the time I finished, she was no longer arguing. She was thinking. I placed the food beside her and told her to eat, not for him, not for me, but for survival. Then I stood up and walked away. Less than a minute later, I heard the sound behind me. Eating, uncontrolled, uneven, mixed with quiet crying. Emotion had lost. Survival had taken over. And that was exactly the result I needed. By the fifth day, the silence in the villa was no longer fragile. It had become routine. No one screamed, no one cried loudly. Everything moved under an invisible pressure that reshaped behavior without permission. But habits do not disappear instantly, and neither does impulse. That afternoon, a sharp crash echoed from upstairs. The sound of glass breaking cut through the calm like a reminder of what he used to be. I did not rush. I simply finished the line I was writing, closed my notebook, and walked upstairs at a steady pace. Gu Jingchuan stood in the middle of the room, breathing heavily. The broken crystal lamp lay scattered across the floor, reflecting light in fragments. The scene was familiar, but his posture was not. He was no longer lost in rage. He was standing still, staring at the damage, as if already calculating the consequence. I stepped closer, looked down at the pieces, and spoke without hesitation. I stated the value of the lamp, then added the cost of the damaged carpet beneath it. My tone remained unchanged, calm, precise, detached. He let out a short, bitter laugh and told me to take it from his shares or his remaining assets. I shook my head and corrected him. All of that was frozen. What remained now was only his labor. Then I reached behind me and took out 3 items: a broom, a dustpan, and a pink apron. I threw them toward him without ceremony. He stared at them as if they did not belong in his world. His expression tightened, his pride, reacting before his logic could respond. He said his name as if that alone should reject the situation. I corrected him again. His name did not matter. His position did not matter. What mattered was the debt. I explained the terms clearly. Each square meter cleaned would reduce a fixed amount from what he owed. If he refused, the interest would increase daily, and the number would grow beyond control. This time, I did not need to push further. He understood. Not emotionally, but mathematically. The silence stretched between us for several seconds. Then, slowly, he bent down, picked up the apron, and held it in his hands. There was hesitation, but no refusal. He put it on awkwardly, unfamiliar with something so simple. His movements lacked elegance, lacked authority, but they carried something new: acceptance. He picked up the broom and began to sweep. The sound was soft, steady, repetitive. Each movement replaced what used to be violent energy with controlled motion. The room that once echoed with destruction now echoed with labor. I stood by the door and watched, not with satisfaction, but with confirmation. This was the turning point. I recorded a short video and sent it to his mother with a brief update. The response came almost instantly. Funds transferred without question. Behind me, he continued working, his breathing heavy, his movements slower as the minutes passed. But he did not stop, not because he was forced, but because stopping now would mean losing more. That was the difference. For the first time, his actions were driven by consequence, not impulse. When he finished, he stood there, exhausted, his hands slightly trembling. He pointed at the cleaned area and demanded the deduction be counted. I checked the space, calculated quickly, and corrected him. The number was lower than he expected. He argued briefly, then fell silent again, accepting the result. I handed him the next instruction to clean the remaining corners, including the parts hidden under furniture. He hesitated for a moment, then continued without another word. The man who once destroyed without thinking was now measuring effort against value. The transformation was not dramatic. It was precise, and it was working. By the 10th day, the villa had changed completely. The transformation was not loud, not dramatic, but absolute. Every corner reflected control. Every object had a place. Every movement had a cost. Rain fell heavily that morning, thick drops striking the glass walls and turning the outside world into a blurred gray painting. The atmosphere felt like something out of a tragic romance, the kind where emotions should overflow, where desperation should reach its peak. Lin Xiaobai chose that moment. She stepped outside into the rain, wearing a thin white dress, letting the water soak through fabric and skin. Her hair clung to her face, her body trembling, but her eyes filled with determination. She shouted his name, her voice breaking through the storm. She said if he would not let her go, she would stand there until she died. Inside the villa, Gu Jingchuan froze. For a brief second, something old flickered inside him, a memory of obsession, of control, of desire to possess. But it did not grow. It stopped. Because something else was stronger now: calculation. I sat on the sofa, typing calmly, and without looking up, I spoke. I listed the cost of medical treatment for pneumonia, emergency transport, hospital fees, medication, recovery time, and the additional financial burden it would create. My voice was steady, clinical, removing every trace of romance from the situation. Gu Jingchuan stood still, listening. Then he grabbed an umbrella and walked outside. Not running, not panicking, walking. He reached her and opened the umbrella above her head, blocking the rain. But instead of pulling her into an embrace, he pointed at her and spoke sharply. He told her to go back inside immediately. He told her she was wasting money. He told her getting sick would increase expenses and he would not tolerate unnecessary loss. His tone was firm, almost irritated. Ling Xiaobai stared at him, frozen. The rain continued to fall, but something else had already collapsed: her expectations. The man who once would have destroyed everything for her now refused to spend even a fraction of that for her suffering. She slowly followed him back inside, silent, confused, unable to process the shift. I watched them return and recorded another update. Emotional dependency reduced, financial awareness stabilized, behavioral control maintained. That afternoon, Gu Jingchuan approached me directly. He looked tired but focused. His movements no longer carried chaos, only intent. He told me he had found a flaw, a major flaw, in his current system. I closed my laptop and waited. He turned the screen toward me, showing a detailed breakdown of expenses. At the center of it all was one line: Ling Xiaobai. He had calculated everything: her food, clothing, maintenance, security costs, even indirect expenses. The result was simple: negative return. He asked me one question: what should he do? I answered without hesitation: either eliminate the cost or turn it into value. That night, he did not sleep. Numbers replaced dreams. By morning, the decision had been made. When Ling Xiaobai came downstairs, he handed her a document. Not a confession, not an apology, a contract. He removed luxury items from her life, reduced unnecessary spending, and assigned tasks: measurable, trackable tasks with clear outcomes. Work equals survival. Effort equals value. She resisted at first, then reality answered for her. Because this time, there was no obsession holding her in place, only structure, and structure does not negotiate. By the 20th day, the system was complete. The villa no longer functioned on emotion. It functioned on balance. Every person inside it had a role. Every action had a consequence. And Gu Jingchuan was no longer a man driven by madness. He had become something far more stable and far more dangerous: a man who understood cost. The final evaluation arrived without warning. 3 black cars entered the estate, moving slowly across a long stone path. The atmosphere shifted instantly, the kind of pressure that only power could bring. His mother stepped out first, elegant, composed, but tense. Her eyes scanned everything, prepared for chaos, prepared for failure. Instead, she found silence, clean floors, order, control. She walked inside and stopped. Gu Jingchuan stood in the center of the living room, dressed perfectly, calm, composed, reviewing reports as if nothing had ever been wrong. Nearby, Ling Xiaobai worked quietly, her movements mechanical, her expression empty. The contrast was undeniable. The chaos was gone, completely. His mother turned to me, her voice shaking, as she asked if he was truly cured. I adjusted my glasses and answered simply: He is functional. That was enough. Payment was completed without delay. The case was officially closed. I packed my files, prepared to leave, and for the first time since arriving, the villa felt irrelevant. The system would continue without me, or so I thought. As I reached the door, a hand stopped me, firm, steady, deliberate. Gu Jingchuan. He stood close, his presence no longer unstable, but heavy with intention. He asked one question. Was the treatment really over? I answered, yes, because technically it was. He paused, then placed a document in front of me. A new contract. Not medical, strategic. He explained it clearly. Partnership, marriage, shared control, shared profit. No emotion, only value. He had analyzed every possible outcome, every risk, every gain, and I was the optimal choice. I looked at the document carefully, every clause precise, every condition balanced, no weakness, no loophole. For a moment, silence stretched between us. Then I smiled slightly, not because of romance, but because of recognition. He had learned everything, and now he was applying it. I added one condition. Control remains mine. He agreed immediately, no hesitation. We signed. No ceremony, no promises, only ink on paper. 1 year later, the company expanded beyond expectation. Growth accelerated, profits increased, stability strengthened. People said he had changed. They were wrong. He had evolved, and I simply gave direction. As for Lin Xiaobai, she continued working, paying off a debt that would take decades to clear. Her story did not end in love. It ended in numbers, and that was the most realistic outcome of all.